Hello, everyone. Today we will explore the life and work of a fascinating author, known as much as he is misunderstood, Niccolo Machiavelli. His name is so famous that it has spawned an adjective, but paradoxically, this adjective does not do justice to the essence of his thought. Machiavelli, a Renaissance philosopher from Florence, is best known for his book The Prince, published in 1513. This work is often perceived as a manual for rulers, unveiling the intricacies of political governance. However, reducing Machiavelli to a purely political philosophy would be a mistake. Although his doctrine has a strong political slant, aiming to define the art of governing, it transcends this dimension. Since antiquity, the art of governing has been at the heart of politics. It is about managing and administering life within the community. However, Machiavelli's vision stands out for its uniqueness, diverging from the traditional political norms of his time. A common misunderstanding regarding Machiavelli is the association of his name with the adjective Machiavellian, connoted with malice and almost devilishness, evoking malevolence and bad intentions. Yet, Machiavelli's philosophy does not advocate deceit. This misconception is crucial to dispel to truly understand the scope and depth of his thought. Machiavelli did not subscribe to the idea of committing evil for evil's sake. However, he argued that in certain contexts, evil could be a tool of governance used to maintain power. According to him, the supreme goal is the preservation of power, thus elaborating a technical science and an art dedicated to this end. It is important to note that any similarity between the concepts presented by Machiavelli and contemporary political practice might seem purely coincidental. Ironically, Machiavelli's influence on political leaders since the 15th century is undeniable, with many political figures citing The Prince as a major influence, even a personal strategy manual. Machiavelli played a pivotal role in the foundation of modern political philosophy, breaking radically from the political philosophies of antiquity and the Middle Ages. His major contribution to modern political philosophy can be encapsulated in the concept of realism. This realism is not about metaphysics, but rather a pragmatic approach to politics, distinguished from idealism by its insistence on recognizing and managing the realities of power and governance. In this discussion, I am not referring to realism as a philosophical concept that views the world as a mental construction. Rather, I am talking about realism in a pragmatic sense, that is, recognizing and accepting reality as it is. Machiavelli's philosophy is based on this realistic principle, asserting that citizens should not be seen as we wish them to be, but as they truly are. It involves understanding people based on their actual nature without trying to transform them into something they are not. Machiavellian realism is based on a particular perception of human nature, acknowledging our intrinsic incapacity to do good, a notion that resonates with Pascal's thoughts on human nature. According to this view, individuals are not driven by altruism, but by selfishness and self-interest. Therefore, establishing models of virtue or promoting morality and religion is futile because man, fundamentally incapable of rising above his selfish instincts, will not respond to these calls to virtue. Machiavelli's realism takes into account the human condition and the actual behavior of individuals. It adopts an anthropological approach, accepting selfishness as a fundamental component of the human being, and proposes to rely on this nature for effective governance. Machiavellian realism is characterized by its pragmatism, where importance is given to concrete results and effects, rather than to pre-established ideals or values. In Machiavelli's view, the essence of politics lies in the art of governing, requiring an upfront acknowledgement of realities such as natural selfishness and the tendency toward vice in humans. To govern effectively, one must exploit these traits, relying on them to maintain power. Acknowledging this pragmatic reality allows for more effective control over the people. To illustrate the revolutionary nature of this approach during the 15th and 16th centuries, let's examine two historical examples. First, Plato's Republic, a 5th century BC work, which describes the foundations of an ideal society, or Callipolis, the beautiful city, centered on virtue and harmony, aiming to embody the good. Plato, at that time, could not imagine separating politics and morality, viewing politics as a means to guide society towards the good. This model contrasts with that of Machiavelli, who, instead of aiming for an ideal of good, focuses on the pragmatic management of power by recognizing and exploiting the less idealized traits of human nature. Now, consider another example with St. Augustine in the 5th century AD. In his work, The City of God, he distinguishes two types of societies, one guided by selfishness, self-love, and the other, ideally, by the love of God. For St. Augustine, the ultimate goal of society is the salvation of souls, thereby creating an environment conducive to spiritual elevation towards God, with heaven as the end goal. In this religious perspective, divine principles govern society, considering earthly life as a prelude to an eternal existence, where true meaning and value lie in the hereafter. Access to this eternal life depends on adherence to divine principles, thus embodying the good during our earthly life. This vision closely integrates politics with moral, philosophical, and religious ideals, forming the basis of the political system. In comparison, Machiavelli signifies a significant epistemological break, introducing a paradigm shift where the good is no longer the central pillar, thus marking a transition to a more pragmatic and realistic approach to politics. In this view, the idea of the good should not be the foundation of politics or the art of governing. Relying on this notion is seen as a futile approach, incompatible with human nature, and doomed to failure or self-destruction. If the political goal is to acquire and maintain power, it would be imprudent to base political action on such unstable foundations as human inclinations towards the good, virtue, or obedience to divine commands. According to this perspective, such attempts are destined to fail, and it is futile to persist in this illusion. This political pragmatism is rooted in the historical context of the Renaissance and more broadly in the period of modernity, which marks a radical shift in the perception of man and human nature, moving towards what has been termed anthropological pessimism. This pessimism reflects the notion that little positive can be expected from human nature, an idea that resonates with Machiavelli's observations on human limitations. Man is primarily motivated by the pursuit of his personal interests, driven by his impulses and emotions. It is pointless to pretend otherwise, or to hope that man is different from his intrinsic nature. It is imperative to recognize and accept human selfishness, using it to our advantage. This embodies a form of political opportunism, which capitalizes on human traits once seen as hindrances to proper political functioning. This approach is similar to judo, where the opponent's strength is redirected for our benefit. In the history of thought, this anthropological pessimism or realism has been adopted by thinkers such as Thomas Hobbes, a 17th century English philosopher. In his work, Leviathan, Hobbes starts by analyzing human nature to conclude that the fear of death is what drives people to behave orderly. This constant selfish instinct, leading to perpetual conflict to surpass others, generates a fear of death, ultimately leading to the cession of power to a protective state. Machiavelli's approach asserts that it is essential to consider the inherent selfishness of human nature and to use it as a lever in governance. Instead of prescribing what people should be, it involves grasping their true nature to govern effectively. The goal is not so much to fulfill the actual desires of the people, but rather to create the perception that these desires are met. For Machiavelli, it is not necessary to adhere to truth or justice towards the people. Maintaining power is paramount. Humans being more responsive to appearances than to reality, a skillful ruler is one who manipulates these perceptions, acting like an illusionist who masters the art of seeming. Governments rely on public opinion to establish their dominance, as these opinions form the basis of their authority. Machiavelli, delving into human psychology, particularly the moods influencing emotions and behaviors, emphasizes that the government does not need to actually satisfy the needs of the people, but rather to convince them that it does. What is essential is that the people believe their interests are considered, as this belief underpins the ruler's authority. A ruler does not have the luxury of indulging in fanciful ideals. He cannot be encumbered by moral principles because his objective is not to lead the people towards the good, but to govern them effectively. Machiavelli highlights two main levers for exercising this governance: sympathy and fear, reflecting the fundamental human motivations of love and fear. Sympathy involves creating the impression of loving the people to win their affection, while fear, deemed more reliable, aims to instill fear, especially that of death, which surpasses all other feelings. Machiavelli believes that fear is a more solid tool of governance than love, because the fear of death is a powerful human motivation that can override affection. He views heroic sacrifices as exceptions that cannot form the basis of stable politics. Thus, exploiting fear makes individuals more docile and obedient. For Machiavelli, morality is not a concern, it is subordinate to political efficacy. Morality may be adopted if it serves to govern, but just as readily abandoned in favor of immorality if deemed necessary. Therefore, in Machiavellian terms, there is no intrinsic moral judgment, but rather a pragmatic approach where the end justifies the means. Machiavelli adopts a pragmatic and rational approach, questioning the most effective strategy to increase grip on the populace. This concern leads to a political pragmatism where the notion of transcendence is absent. In the Machiavellian perspective, there is no hierarchy of moral values or absolute concepts of good and evil, which removes any moral obstacle to governmental action. Efficiency and results are the sole criteria of political action, aiming at the preservation and consolidation of power. Machiavelli does not advocate immorality, but amorality, where morality is sidelined, not in opposition, but as a non-essential element. This foreshadows a form of early utilitarianism, where actions are judged not on their principles, but on their consequences, with power as the primary objective. In this light, rulers are encouraged to act morally or immorally based on what furthers the maintenance and strengthening of their power. Machiavelli underscores that notions of good and evil are relative and instrumental in the pursuit of power. This text clearly illustrates the political pragmatism of Machiavelli, highlighting his detachment from any moral or divine authority and advocating a moral opportunism essential to the preservation of power. Machiavelli emphasizes the need for leaders to be flexible, meaning they should know how to disregard evil and moral censure, adopting a stance of moral neutrality to govern effectively based on the true nature of humans. He observes that men do not always keep their commitments, thereby questioning the necessity for rulers to honor their promises. This perspective shapes Machiavelli's political doctrine, where maintaining power is the ultimate goal. In conclusion, this approach invites reflection on whether Machiavelli, by rejecting moral and transcendental values, has not rather redefined the concept of the sacred, shifting its essence from the moral to the political sphere, where the raison d'etat now prevails as a fundamental principle. In the context of the 18th century, this raises the question of the compatibility between the reason of state and the reason of the people, questioning whether the logics of power can be harmonized with those of citizenship. It is a fundamental interrogation, offering food for thought for everyone. By developing his guide for rulers, Machiavelli may have, perhaps unintentionally, created a manual for citizens to decipher the actions of their rulers, similar to what La Boétie achieved with his discourse on voluntary servitude, providing keys to understand and potentially free oneself from authority. In doing so, Machiavelli could have, unwittingly, equipped citizens with a tool for autonomous awareness, enabling them to understand their role in relation to rulers. This raises the contemplation that the power of rulers derives from the governed, questioning whether leaders could exist without the submission of the citizens. I leave it to everyone to ponder this question. I hope this exploration has been stimulating, and we will meet again soon for new discussions. Until then, take care.